Jesus teaches us that we should love God with every aspect of who we are, and that would include with our mind as well. But yet I find that many churches discourage the intellectual life. They discourage the life of the mind. What can we do to help young people, particularly in the church, to recognize that the life of the mind is part of the Christian faith? I'm joined today by George Haraksin, who is a philosopher and a Christian, to help unpack that question. George, when you interact with young people, how do you, as a pastor and a philosopher, encourage them to pursue an intellectual life as part of their faith?
Yeah, I've done that both within the church, being a pastor and a leader in the church, and as a philosophy professor. I think for the person who calls himself a Christian, and of course, we are called as the church. The church isn't the building. So when we refer to the church, I think it's helpful to remind ourselves that we are the church, the called out ones. And Jesus told us, as you alluded to right at the opening there, that we're called, both in the Old and the New Testament, to love God with all of our heart, soul, but mind is included in that. We have to love the Lord our God with all of our mind, including other things, our heart and our strength. And so I think reminding people of that command, it is a command. And if we call ourselves followers, students of Jesus, we need to love him with all of our mind and reflect that in our various pursuits. From plumber to president, each of those will require some aspect of loving God with our mind. I also think one way I do it in philosophy is that I talk about, is Jesus a philosopher? And did he touch on these subjects like metaphysics and epistemology? Of course, he touched on ethics. So what do we think about him? And even if you don't agree that he's a philosopher, he certainly had a philosophy about these matters. And when you observe Jesus and look at how he dialogues, as Dallas Willard was fond of saying, he's the smartest man who has ever lived. And I've always liked that phrase. Sometimes growing up or being a part of the church, you're rightly taught that Jesus is Lord, but to think of him as smart too is important, that he knows what he's talking about. He is a wise sage. And I think the Gospel of John brings that out in particular. So helping them remember the command to love God with all of your mind, and knowing that God blesses the intellectual pursuits.
Why do you think there is sometimes an anti-intellectual current within a church?
Yeah, there's a big historical story to that. J.P. Moreland's book, Love the Lord your God with all of your mind, goes into a little bit of the historical aspects of that. But sometimes it's just a misunderstanding of a scripture. Take the Colossians passage that says, see to it that no one takes you captive by hollow and deceptive philosophy, which originates from the minds of men and is not from the mind of Christ, right? So it can look like in that verse that there is a disparaging of philosophy, but it says the qualifier is hollow and deceptive philosophy. C.S. Lewis said, good philosophy must exist, if at minimum just to combat bad philosophy, right? And the qualifier hollow and deceptive is important. If you ate bad food at a restaurant, you don't stop eating food. You just avoid bad food. If you encounter or have lived bad philosophy, I say don't get rid of philosophy, get rid of the bad philosophy. We're supposed to take on the mind of Christ, the New Testament says. And so in order to do that, we will need to be good philosophers, good theologians, good scientists. And that's important to remind ourselves and others along the way.